I disappeared with my children. The silence in the car was piercing as I drove away from the house that, until a few hours ago, I called home. The suitcases were in the back seat, thrown hastily, along with the scattered toys that I managed to grab without thinking twice. My heart hammered in my chest, a mixture of anger and despair, while my fingers trembled on the steering wheel. I could still hear the last thing he said on the phone. "You are now free to live with your lover. My children and I are leaving." The line went dead after that. I imagined her face when she heard those words, despair taking over, her wide eyes darting around the empty house, looking for us, finding only emptiness echoing through the room. I left her there, exactly as she deserved. But had I really made the right decision? The question rang with every kilometer I advanced on the road, but the answer came like a punch to the stomach every time the image of her dancing in another man's arms came back to me. It was the same face that I loved, the same smile that made me believe in promises, the same voice that swore eternal love as we shared plans for the future. I trusted her. I trusted so much that I never suspected the extra hours at work, the extended meetings, the business dinners. It all seemed so plausible until the day I saw her walking into that party. The tight dress I bought myself, the perfume I gave her as a gift for our anniversary, the look she gave him. I could have walked in, made a scene, snatched her away in front of everyone. But no. I waited. I waited until she returned home, expecting to find her husband and children asleep. She found nothing. And maybe that's what hurt her the most. I stopped the car at a gas station. The children slept in the back seat, oblivious to the chaos that was engulfing their lives. I picked up the phone again, but hesitated before calling. What else was there to say? I wanted answers. I wanted to understand how someone who shared so much time with me could destroy everything because of a moment of desire or perhaps months of lies that I was too blind to see. My mind went back to the last few months, to the signs I ignored. The long showers, the messages she deleted too quickly, the empty smiles that seemed forced. I wanted to believe that I was paranoid, that the stress of work was making me see things where there were none. But there was. And now there was no going back. "Please tell me where you are. I can explain." That's what she said when she finally called me. Explain? How does one explain something like this? I took a deep breath, clutched the phone in my hand and said the only thing I could. "You don't need to explain anything anymore." He finished. And I hung up. I expected to feel relief after that, but the emptiness was immediate. I wanted to hate her, and part of me did. But another part, the one that refused to accept that everything was over, was still looking for a justification, a reason, anything that would make that pain bearable. The night wore on, and I needed a place to stay. I didn't want to think about tomorrow, or the answers I would have to give the children when they woke up. I just wanted to forget. But forgetting was impossible when all I saw, whenever I closed my eyes, was the image of her smiling at another man. The man who was probably comforting her now. Was she sorry? Or had I planned all this a long time ago? I didn't know what was worse, imagining that I had been deceived for months or accepting that I had been cheated on in a matter of days. The phone rang again, and this time I didn't answer. She left a message, and even though I knew that hearing it would only bring more pain, I pressed play. His voice was shaky, but there was a desperation there that I hadn't expected. "I know I made a mistake. But you can't take the children. Please, I beg you, come home. We can solve this. I'll do whatever it takes." She cried. For the first time in years, I heard her cry. But was it true regret or just fear of facing the consequences of what he did? I hung up without answering. The sound of her tears echoed in my mind as I walked back to the car and looked at my children, so innocent, unaware that their lives had changed forever. I wanted to protect them. I wanted to make sure they never felt the pain I was feeling. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the truth. I also needed answers. I needed to know how everything had gotten to this point. And that was what kept me awake, driving aimlessly, while her words rattled around in my head. Please come home. But could I do it? Was there still something left to save in that relationship? It was then that I realized that maybe her betrayal wasn't the end of the story, but just the beginning of something much bigger. Something I still didn't fully understand. Because despite everything, I still felt like there was something wrong that night, something she wasn't telling me. And I knew that sooner or later the truth would come out. I just wasn't prepared to find out what it was. Welcome to the channel. Here, we never support any type of betrayal. All the stories presented are fictional, created to show how infidelity can destroy lives, leave deep scars and change destinies forever. Get ready, because what you're about to hear is a shocking story, full of twists, intense emotions and an impactful ending. Take a deep breath. The journey begins now. Michael adjusted the knot of his tie in front of the mirror, his fingers shaking a little as he tried to control the nervousness that insisted on being present on important nights. The reflection staring back at him was that of a 37-year-old man, handsome, with a face marked by firm features and a look that always conveyed confidence, but that night there was something different. Maybe it was the tiredness accumulated after weeks of intense work or, who knows, the silent discomfort that had been hovering in his mind lately, like a whisper he couldn't decipher. Still, he smiled to himself, trying to shake off the discomfort. He knew he needed to be impeccable. Her wife's company event was important to her and, even though she preferred quiet nights at home, she had promised that she would make an effort to support her, as she always did. Olivia appeared at the bedroom door, already ready, and Michael needed a few seconds to absorb the image. She looked stunning, with a dress that perfectly outlined her elegant body, her hair done in loose waves and her lips painted red, a tone she usually wore only on special occasions. He watched her for a moment longer than usual, as if trying to commit that image to memory. There was something almost unreal about her that night, something that aroused in him both pride and slight discomfort. Olivia had always been beautiful, but it looked like she had tried harder than usual, as if she wanted to impress someone. Michael shook his head, pushing the thought away before he even allowed it to take root. She smiled when she found him looking, the kind of smile that always made him feel lucky to have her by his side. They had been married for 12 years, long enough to know each other's most subtle details, like the gestures that revealed nervousness or the words spoken just to fill the silence. Olivia was always more extroverted, someone who brightened up any room with her presence, while Michael preferred discretion and moments together. This difference, instead of separating them, always kept them balanced, like two halves that completed each other. At least that's how he liked to see things. Over the past few months, however, Michael has felt the distance growing between them, like a barely visible crack that threatens to spread. He blamed work, social commitments, even the tiredness of his young children, but he never let insecurity take over. After all, they always found a way to find each other again, to reconnect when it seemed that routine was pushing them apart. The night went on like so many others. The room was full, the low lights created an elegant atmosphere, and wine glasses were filled frequently. Olivia seemed to be in her element, laughing and chatting animatedly with coworkers and acquaintances, while Michael remained somewhat on the sidelines, watching her with his usual admiration. But that night, something changed. He noticed how her eyes sparkled differently, how she leaned in to listen to the words of someone across the table with an attention that seemed more than professional. Michael tried to shake off the growing discomfort, telling himself that it was just momentary insecurity, perhaps the result of a long day at work or the alcohol that was beginning to take effect. He smiled, got up and went to get another drink, determined not to let his mind deceive him. Olivia, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to his gaze, completely absorbed in the conversation. There was an energy in her that Michael hadn't seen in a long time, an enthusiasm that reminded him of the early years of their marriage, when everything was new and every touch carried electricity. But now, that energy seemed misplaced, directed towards someone other than him. Michael tried to ignore it, focused on talking to the other husbands present, but his hands remained tight around the glass, as if that small pressure was enough to keep it anchored. The ride home was silent, broken only by the occasional sound of the radio and the hum of the engine. Olivia rested her head on the glass, apparently tired after hours of social interaction. Michael drove with a restless mind, fighting the thoughts that insisted on forming. He wanted to believe that nothing had changed, that her smile that night was just part of her natural charm, the same lightness that had always attracted him. But there was something about her gestures, her looks and the way she avoided looking at him directly that left a bitter taste in his mouth. When they got home, Olivia went straight to her room, saying she needed to rest. Michael stayed in the living room for a while, sitting on the couch, staring into space as he tried to convince himself that he was just tired and paranoid. His children slept peacefully, and he should be grateful for that stability, for everything they had built together. But instead, his chest felt heavy, as if he were about to lose something he didn't even know how to hold. That night became a turning point for Michael, although he didn't know it yet. Over the next few days, he tried hard to follow the routine, ignoring the thoughts that tormented him, but every little detail seemed to increase his restlessness. Olivia was still smiling and present, but there were moments when she seemed distant, as if her mind was somewhere else. Michael tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself that everything was fine, but the doubts grew like deep, uncontrollable roots. Meanwhile, Olivia was also struggling with her own thoughts. She loved Michael, or at least she wanted to believe that, but there was something about her that seemed unfulfilled, a hunger for something she couldn't define. As much as she tried to focus on her family and her marriage, there was a part of her that yearned for freedom, for excitement, for something that would make her feel alive again. And, although he tried to hide it, the internal conflict showed in his gestures, in his quick glances at his phone and in the way he avoided certain topics. The tension between the two grew silently, like a taut rope about to break. Every word spoken seemed loaded with meaning, every look lasted a little longer than necessary. Michael began to observe more, noticing the times, the messages, the little moments when Olivia seemed lost in thought. He hated feeling like this, like someone on the edge of a precipice, but he couldn't ignore the signs any longer. The feeling that something was out of place consumed him, but he didn't know how much that suspicion was about to turn his life upside down. That night, as Michael finally fell asleep on the couch, Olivia looked at the phone in her hands, indecisive, fighting the guilt that was already beginning to build inside her. Neither she nor Michael could have imagined what was to come. Michael couldn't say exactly when he started to feel something was wrong. Maybe it was that night, at the company dinner, when Olivia's laugh sounded a little too loud or when her eyes sparkled in a way he hadn't seen in years. Maybe it was in the following weeks, when she started leaving work early and returning later, always with an excuse ready on the tip of her tongue. At first, he tried to ignore it. He convinced himself that it was just paranoia, a side effect of accumulated fatigue and the pressures of work. But the restlessness refused to go away. It grew every night that Olivia lay next to her, and even there, it seemed distant, as if her mind was somewhere else. He found himself observing her more closely, noticing details that had previously gone unnoticed. The hidden smiles when looking at your phone, the longer showers, the perfume you started using more frequently. Michael wanted to believe there was an explanation for all of this, but each attempt to rationalize only increased the feeling that something was slipping through his fingers. He began testing the waters, asking casual questions about her schedule, her co-workers, unexpected events that came up at the last minute. Olivia responded naturally, but he felt the weight of tension in the air, as if there was something she was trying too hard to hide. The days passed, and Michael could no longer ignore the tightness in his chest. He decided to take action. The afternoon Olivia told him she had an important meeting and would be late. He said he would stay home with the kids and wished her good luck. But as soon as she left, an uneasiness came over him. He picked up his phone and opened the tracking app they had installed months ago to monitor each other's safety. It wasn't something he used to use, but that night his fingers slid across the screen almost automatically. The dot on the map showed that Olivia was not going to the office. Michael felt his stomach drop. He tried to calm himself, telling himself it could be a detour, a quick stop somewhere before the meeting. But when the score kept moving in a direction completely opposite to the work, he knew. Every kilometer covered by the red dot was like a slow stab. He took the car keys, called the nanny to ask to stay with the children and left without thinking twice. The road seemed longer than it should have been. The streetlights passed quickly, but to Michael, every minute seemed like an eternity. The location indicated a residential neighborhood, far enough away to be discreet, but not so far away as to arouse suspicion. When he turned onto the indicated street, he saw Olivia's car parked in front of a house. He stopped a little further away, took a deep breath and tried to decide what he would do. Part of him wanted to leave, pretend he hadn't seen anything, but the other part, the part that was guiding him here, needed to know the truth. Michael got out of the car and walked to the house. The curtains were open, and lights illuminated the living room. He looked through the window, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Olivia was sitting on the couch, with another man beside her. They laughed, and the way he touched her arm made Michael feel as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. For a moment, he couldn't move. He stood there, looking, trying to convince himself that he was seeing wrong, that this was a misunderstanding. But then she leaned in, and the kiss they shared destroyed whatever illusion he still tried to maintain. Anger came first, burning like fire in his veins. Then, the pain. A pain that took over every fiber of his body, leaving him breathless. He clenched his fists and backed away, not knowing what to do. Go in there and confront them. Make a scene. But what about the children? Thinking about them kept him from losing control. He walked away, went back to the car, and sat on the seat for minutes that seemed like hours. When he finally picked up his phone, he saw that Olivia had left a message. She warned him that the meeting would last a little longer and that she loved him. The words felt like a cruel joke. Michael let out a bitter laugh and threw the phone onto the seat next to him. He didn't come home that night. He drove aimlessly until he found a cheap motel on the road. His head throbbed, and his chest felt like it was about to explode. He spent the night awake, reliving every moment of their marriage, every promise made, every dream shared. I couldn't understand how everything had gotten to that point. They had problems, yes, like any couple, but he never imagined that Olivia would be capable of crossing that line. The next morning, Michael returned home before the children woke up. Olivia was already there, acting as if nothing had happened. He watched her make coffee, smile at her children and ask about his day. Part of Michael wanted to confront her right then and there, throw her against the wall and demand answers, but another part needed time. I needed to figure out what I was going to do next. Over the next few days, he discreetly followed her, collecting more evidence. Every secret meeting, every deleted message, every poorly told excuse fueled the pain and anger that grew inside him. Olivia continued to smile, living her life as if nothing was wrong, while Michael was torn apart inside. It was on a rainy afternoon, after seeing her rush out of work and into a cafe with the same man, that Michael decided he couldn't wait any longer. He knew he needed to act, but doubt gnawed at him. Would confronting her solve anything? And the children? How to protect them from imminent destruction? When Olivia got home that night, she found Michael sitting in the living room, waiting. His gaze was different, heavy, as if he already knew everything. She hesitated at the door, feeling the weight of the silence. Michael stood up slowly, crossed his arms and asked if she had anything to say. Her silence was the answer he needed. Olivia tried to speak, tried to find a justification, but the words died before they came out. Michael didn't scream, he didn't make threats. He just turned and left the room, leaving her there, alone, with the guilt. As he drove that night, Michael knew this betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg. Something bigger was hidden behind that behavior, something he couldn't yet see, but that was about to be revealed. And when that happened, nothing would be the same again. Michael stared at Olivia as if he were seeing a stranger. She was sitting on the couch, with her arms crossed and her eyes downcast, unable to hold his gaze. The room felt smaller, suffocating, as if the walls were closing in. Michael paced back and forth, breathing heavily, trying to maintain control. The words he wanted to say accumulated in his throat, but nothing came out. Olivia finally looked up, and what he saw in her eyes was a mix of guilt and despair. She opened her mouth, but he raised his hand, interrupting any attempt at explanation. He needed to speak first, he needed to release everything he had been holding in for the last few days. Michael took a deep breath, trying to find a tone that didn't overflow the anger that consumed him. He said he knew. I knew everything. He told her about the phone tracking, about the nights she claimed to be in meetings and was actually in another man's arms. Olivia brought her hands to her face, but he continued, his voice becoming firmer. She asked how long it had been happening, why she did it and, most importantly, who the man she was seeing was. Olivia tried to stop him, tried to explain that it wasn't how he was thinking, but he refused to listen to excuses. I wanted answers, and I wanted them right now. Olivia finally stood up, her body shaking, her hands clenched. She began to speak, her voice breaking. She said she hadn't planned it, that she didn't know how she got to that point, but that she was sorry. Michael laughed, a bitter, incredulous laugh, and asked how someone remorseful could lie for so long. Olivia begged him to let her explain, to hear what she had to say before making any decisions. Michael crossed his arms and said he was listening, but nothing she said would change what he already knew. It was at that moment that Olivia broke down, tears streaming down her face as she confessed the truth. She said the man she was involved with was a former coworker. Someone who had come into her life when she was feeling invisible, when she felt like their marriage had turned into a routine and that Michael no longer saw her as he used to. She cried as she said she wasn't justifying what she did, but that she needed to feel wanted again. Michael turned around, hands in his hair, trying to contain the explosion he felt inside. He asked her if she really thought that explained anything, if she thought he deserved to be betrayed because of a moment of weakness of hers. That's when Olivia paused, as if she was fighting something even bigger. Michael noticed and asked her to speak quickly, to say at once what else she was hiding. Olivia hesitated, but then, her voice breaking, she revealed that the man she was involved with was not just a lover. He was the father of a friend of theirs, someone Michael knew superficially, someone who had come to their house on casual occasions. Michael was in shock, feeling as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. The anger was replaced by a piercing emptiness. He asked how she could be so reckless, so cruel when involving someone so close. Olivia tried to get closer, but he backed away, as if her touch were poison. She said she was sorry, that she had tried to break up, but that things had gotten out of control. Michael asked if she had thought about the children, if she had considered the impact this would have on the family. Olivia sobbed, saying she never wanted to hurt anyone, that she thought she could fix things before everything was found out. Michael laughed again, a hollow laugh, and asked how she could be so naive. He walked away, grabbed his car keys and said he needed time to think. Olivia tried to stop him, grabbed his arm and begged him to stay, but he let go and walked out the door without looking back. Michael drove aimlessly, trying to process everything he had just heard. Her words echoed in his mind, mixed with the images he couldn't erase. He felt anger, pain, humiliation and, above all, a deep sense of betrayal. Olivia not only betrayed him but also involved someone who, in a way, was part of their circle. And now, all he could think about was how to rebuild his life after that devastation. When he finally returned home, Olivia was sitting in the same spot, as if she hadn't moved. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she looked exhausted. Michael entered without saying a word, and she stood up immediately. He said he didn't want to lose their family, that he would do whatever was necessary to make things right. Michael stood there, looking at her, not knowing if he could still see the woman he married. He said he didn't know if he could forgive her, but he needed time. Olivia agreed, promising that she would wait as long as necessary. Over the next few days, Michael immersed himself in work, trying to escape the pain. But the questions kept coming back. He wondered what he had done wrong, what he could have done differently. Olivia, on the other hand, seemed determined to prove that there was still something between them worth saving. She made a point of being present, of showing contrition and a willingness to make things right. But Michael couldn't ignore the weight of the betrayal, the shadow of what happened hanging over every interaction between them. It was only when he received an unexpected call that everything changed. The voice on the other end of the line made him freeze. It was Olivia's friend's husband, the man she implicated in the betrayal. He wanted to meet, said he needed to talk. Michael agreed, not knowing what to expect. When he arrived at the agreed location, he found a destroyed man, with deep circles under his eyes and a lost look. He told her that he had discovered everything and that Olivia wasn't the only one to blame. It revealed something Michael could never have imagined, something that transformed the pain he felt into something even darker. The truth was about to come out, and Michael knew that after that conversation, nothing would be the same again. He left the place feeling that a new abyss was opening before him, and for the first time since the beginning of everything, he realized that it wasn't just Olivia who was keeping secrets. His world was about to fall apart in ways he could never have predicted. Michael stood before the man who, until that night, was just a familiar face at parties and casual gatherings. Now, there, sitting in the chair of a small downtown cafe, he seemed like a specter, a dark reflection of what had once been. The sunken, reddish eyes, the restless hands on the table, betrayed sleepless nights and a guilt that seemed to weigh more than he could bear. Michael sat up slowly, muscles tense, and waited. The silence between the two was interrupted only by the clinking of the coffee cups that the waitress placed on the table. The man looked up and began to speak bluntly. He said he knew Michael was already aware of Olivia's betrayal, but that he needed to know something more. Michael crossed his arms, leaning forward, feeling his stomach drop. He asked what could be worse than what had already been revealed. The man took a deep breath and then said that the relationship between him and Olivia was not new, that it had been going on for longer than Michael imagined. He confessed that he had tried to break up several times, but Olivia was looking for him, insisting, saying that she couldn't leave it behind. Michael felt his heart race, but he maintained control. He asked why the man was telling him all this now. That's when he looked down and revealed that Olivia wasn't the only one to blame. He said that, at first, everything seemed like a temporary affair, something that would end without major consequences, but over time, things got out of control. Olivia had started making demands, threatening to tell his wife everything if he tried to walk away. Michael's eyes widened, feeling the betrayal growing even more inside him, like a flame that wouldn't stop spreading. The man continued. He said he had tried to cut off contact several times, but Olivia used personal information against him. Messages, photos, meeting records. She kept everything. Michael shook his head in disbelief. He asked how he could be so naive, how he could get involved with someone who was married and still allow things to get to this point. The man bowed his head, admitting that he had made a mistake and that he was paying for it. He said that his wife already knew everything, that she had filed for divorce and that he was about to lose everything. But the worst was yet to come. Michael clenched his fists, waiting. It was then that the man said that Olivia had used the information against him to get more than just dates. He said she had asked for money, threatened to expose everything not only to his wife, but also to his co-workers and even his children. Michael felt as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. He asked if that was true, if Olivia was really capable of something like that. The man just nodded, saying he had proof, messages, and bank transfers that he could show if Michael wanted to see. Michael stood up abruptly, his chair scraping on the cafe floor. He needed a few seconds to regain control before asking why the man was telling him all this now. The answer came with tears in his eyes. He said he couldn't bear the wait any longer, that he needed Michael to know the truth before it was too late. Michael felt anger boiling inside him, but there was something more. An emptiness that seemed to grow with each word spoken. He took the car keys and left without saying anything else. He drove aimlessly for a while, trying to put the pieces together. Olivia wasn't just unfaithful. She had manipulated, threatened, used the man she was involved with to get what she wanted. The woman he thought he had known for 12 years, the mother of his children, now seemed like someone completely different. When he finally parked in front of the house, he felt the weight of reality crashing down on him. The lights were on, and he knew Olivia was waiting. He entered the door without knocking, found her in the living room and stared at her. Olivia stood up as soon as she saw him, her face lit up with the hope of reconciliation. But his expression made her flinch. Michael walked up to her, stopped a few feet away, and asked if there was anything else she wanted to confess. Olivia hesitated, then shook her head. Michael laughed, a dry, incredulous laugh, and asked again. This time his voice was harsher. He said he knew about the threats, about the money, about how she had manipulated the man she was involved with. Olivia went pale, her eyes wide. She started to deny it, but Michael interrupted her. He said he had seen the messages, that he knew about the bank transfers and that there was no way to hide it anymore. Olivia collapsed onto the couch, putting her hands over her face. She said she didn't know how it happened, that at first it was just a way to feel desired, but then everything got out of control. She cried as she said she was afraid of losing everything, that she felt Michael was distant and that this made her seek attention elsewhere. But nothing she said seemed to justify what she had done. Michael asked if she ever thought about the children, if she thought about what would happen to their family. Olivia begged for forgiveness, saying she would do anything to make things right, but Michael shook his head. He said it was already too late. He could no longer look at her without seeing the lies, the manipulations, and the betrayals. He said he needed to protect his children, and that meant Olivia could no longer be part of that house. Olivia went into despair, kneeling before him, begging him to reconsider. Michael walked away, saying there was nothing left to talk about. He took the car keys and went to his children's room, gently waking them up and asking them to get ready. Olivia screamed, saying he couldn't take them, but Michael ignored him. He knew that, at that moment, his priority was to protect the children from the chaos that was about to erupt. As he hung out with his children, Michael felt a heavy heart, but also a determination he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew that night was not the end. There was still more to face, more truths to be revealed. But for the first time in weeks, he felt in control. And that was all he needed to move forward. Michael drove down the deserted road with his hands tight on the steering wheel, his gaze fixed on the horizon as the headlights cut through the darkness. In the back seat, the children slept soundly, oblivious to the chaos that had taken place in their lives. The silence in the car was overwhelming, filled only by the hum of the engine and the muffled sound of the children's heavy breathing. Michael's mind, however, was far from there. He relived every word spoken that night, every tear Olivia shed, every desperate plea for him to stay, so they could make things right. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't erase the images that were engraved in his memory. The betrayal, the manipulations, the lies. Everything seemed to spin in his head like an endless movie, leaving him trapped between pain and anger. He knew that when he left that house, he had crossed a point of no return. There was no turning back, not after everything that had been revealed. But that didn't make the decisions any easier. As he looked in the rearview mirror and saw the innocent faces of his children, he felt the weight of responsibility fall upon him. He needed to be strong, he needed to protect those who mattered most, but doubt still gnawed at his chest. Was I making the right decision? Was he depriving the children of something that, deep down, could still be saved? These questions haunted him like ghosts, but he pushed them away. He couldn't allow himself to hesitate. He stopped the car at a small motel on the side of the road, booking a simple room and carrying his bags while his children continued to sleep. He laid them on the bed carefully, covering them with the thin blanket and sitting in an armchair next to it. He stayed there for a while, watching them breathe peacefully, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. He picked up his phone and saw several messages from Olivia, all begging him to answer. He didn't respond. He felt that any word said at that moment would only deepen the chasm between the two. The next morning, the phone's alarm clock vibrated and Michael got up feeling heavy, as if he had aged years in a single night. He got ready to leave with his children, but before leaving, he opened his phone and listened to one of the messages. Olivia's voice sounded different. She was no longer the woman who cried and begged the night before. Now she seemed calmer, more in control, as if she had found new strength. He said he understood his decision, but that he wouldn't give up. She said she would do everything she could to prove that she could still be a present and reliable mother. He asked him to think about the children and not to make hasty decisions. Michael hung up before she finished, but the words stuck in his mind. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and difficult decisions. Michael contacted lawyers, organized documents, and began planning his next steps. The constant presence of his children was the only thing that kept him firm, but even so, the doubts persisted. He felt torn between the desire to cut Olivia out of his life forever and the need to maintain some kind of balance for the sake of the children. And it was in this dilemma that he began to realize the true weight of the choices he was about to make. Olivia didn't give up. She called every day, sent messages and even showed up at his office once, asking to talk. Michael was resistant at first, but eventually agreed to meet her. They needed to discuss practical issues, such as child custody and the division of assets. The meeting took place in a park, where they could talk away from the prying ears of lawyers or acquaintances. Olivia arrived first, sitting on a bench under the shade of a tree. When Michael approached, she stood up quickly, her eyes full of expectation. He kept his distance, crossing his arms and waiting for her to speak. Olivia started apologizing again, but Michael interrupted her, saying he wasn't there to talk about the past, but about the children's future. He said he wanted full custody, that he no longer trusted her to raise the children after everything she had done. Olivia went pale, but quickly recovered. He said he understood his point of view, but that he would not give up fighting for his children. She said she knew she had made mistakes, but that they needed her too. Michael laughed, a short, bitter laugh, and asked if she really thought she could regain her trust after everything. Olivia approached, her hands shaking. He said that, no matter how difficult it was, he still loved him, that he always loved him, even in the moments when he let himself be carried away by emotions and wrong choices. Michael looked away, feeling the weight of her words. He wanted to believe, he wanted to find a reason to forgive her, but everything inside him screamed that it was too late. Olivia insisted, saying she was willing to seek help, go to therapy, and rebuild what they had, even if it took years. Michael shook his head, saying he didn't know if there was anything to rebuild. Silence fell between the two, and Olivia finally gave in. He said he would accept what was best for his children, but asked him to consider an arrangement where he could see them regularly. Michael hesitated, fighting his own feelings. I knew that, despite everything, Olivia was still their mother and that, as much as she wanted to protect them, she also needed to think about the impact the separation would have. He promised to think about it and walked away, leaving Olivia alone in the park. Over the next few days, Michael began to get back on his feet. She focused on work, the children's routine and trying to find a new normal. But even as I moved forward, I still felt the weight of the decisions I needed to make. Olivia kept trying to get closer, but Michael held firm, knowing there were still many unanswered questions. It was only when he received a new call that everything changed. It was the man Olivia had gotten involved with. He said he had something more to tell, something that couldn't wait. Michael felt his heart race as he listened. The man revealed that Olivia had not acted alone, that there was another person involved, someone close to both of them, someone who knew Michael's secrets and who could use this information against him. Michael hung up the phone, feeling his blood run cold. I knew it wasn't over. And, at that moment, he realized that he was entering an even more dangerous game, where the truths remained hidden and the risks only increased. Michael remained standing in front of the door for long seconds before finally turning the handle and entering. The silence inside the house hit him like a blow, heavy and suffocating, and the absence of the childish laughter that previously echoed through those corridors only reinforced the feeling of emptiness he already carried. His hands shook as he placed the keys on the table, as if, in that instant, everything that had been built over the years had turned to dust. He walked to the living room, where Olivia was sitting on the sofa, her eyes red from crying, her fingers trembling holding an already crumpled scarf. She looked up when she saw him, but said nothing. For the first time, he seemed to know that words had lost the power to fix what was broken. Michael approached slowly, feeling the weight of the decision he had made. He said he had hired a lawyer and that the process was already underway. Olivia began to sob, trying to argue, but he raised his hand, asking her to listen to him. He said he couldn't continue living in a lie, that he had tried to understand, to forgive, but that some things were unforgivable. He mentioned the manipulations, threats and destruction she caused not only to her marriage, but to her own image as a mother. Olivia fell to her knees, clutching the hem of his shirt, begging for one more chance, but Michael pulled away, saying he couldn't keep putting the kids in the middle of this mess. As Olivia cried, he made it clear that he would guarantee a fair deal, allowing regular visits, but that she would need to seek professional help if she wanted to redeem herself in the eyes of her children. Olivia screamed that she loved him, that she would do anything to win back his trust, but Michael just shook his head and left. In the car, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath, feeling relief mixed with guilt. He knew that decision would haunt him for a while, but he also knew that he needed to move on. The following days were a whirlwind of changes. Michael found a small but cozy apartment to start over with his children. She tried to keep their routine as stable as possible, dividing her time between work and taking care of their new home. Olivia appeared a few times, trying to get closer, but Michael kept his distance, only allowing scheduled meetings with the children. Despite everything, he realized that his children still loved her, and this made him accept that, no matter how difficult it was, he would need to maintain some type of communication. Little by little, the children began to adapt, but questions about why their mother was no longer home still hung in the air. Michael answered carefully, never exposing the whole truth, but each question was like a reminder of everything he had lost. Meanwhile, Olivia began to face the consequences of her actions. The man she had been involved with filed for divorce from his wife and ended up losing not only his family, but also his job, after the scandal was leaked to his superiors. Desperate, he tried to get back in touch with Olivia, but she rejected him, realizing too late that he had destroyed everything he had for someone who, in the end, was worthless. Alone and isolated, Olivia fell into a cycle of regret and guilt, struggling to stay on her feet. She sought professional help, started attending therapy and tried, in every way, to prove that she was willing to change. But Michael was no longer willing to wait for a redemption that might never come. The man who revealed Olivia's secrets also faced consequences. He lost the respect of his children and his wife, who did not accept any attempt at reconciliation. He moved into a small apartment and began dealing with legal proceedings, trying to preserve what little was left of his reputation. He called Michael a few times, asking for forgiveness and offering help if he needed more evidence against Olivia, but Michael refused, saying he didn't need him anymore. For Michael, that chapter was closed. Despite the pain, Michael began to find peace in the small moments. His children's laughter during breakfast, the drawings spread around the room and the peaceful nights watching movies together brought a sense of purpose that he thought he had lost. It was in one of those moments, while taking his children to the park, that he met someone who made him believe in love again. She was a teacher, sweet and understanding, and knew how to respect Michael's time without forcing him to go faster than he was ready. Little by little, she entered his and the children's lives, bringing lightness to a heart that still carried scars. Michael allowed himself to feel again, something he found impossible at first, and realized that not all pain needs to last forever. Olivia, on the other hand, continued to struggle to rebuild her life. She began to get involved in social projects and dedicated herself to becoming a better mother in the moments she had with her children. Although he still tried to get closer to Michael, he finally understood that the past could not be erased and that some wounds never heal completely. He decided to focus on his own recovery, accepting the consequences of his choices and trying to find a purpose beyond what he had lost. When Michael finally signed the divorce papers, he felt a mixture of relief and sadness. He knew that signature marked the end of an era, but it also symbolized a new beginning. He put the documents in the drawer, looked at his children playing in the living room and felt, for the first time in a long time, that he was in the right place. Olivia's betrayal left deep scars, but it also brought lessons that he would never forget. He discovered the importance of trusting his own instincts, valuing simple moments and allowing himself to start over, even when everything seemed lost. Michael moved on, stronger and more aware of who he was. Olivia learned the hard way that choices have consequences and that forgiveness, when it comes, needs to be earned. The children grew up surrounded by their father's love and, despite the difficulties, found happiness in the new life they built together. And, as time passed, everyone learned that, even after a storm, the sun can always shine again, but only for those who are willing to face it head-on. Now we want to know your opinion on this story. What did you think of the ending and the characters' choices? Comment below and share your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue following more impactful stories like this. We remind you that this channel does not support, under any circumstances, any type of betrayal. Thanks for following us and see you in the next story.